Dr. Beverly Daniel Tatum. Yes. I know that some of you are here because you knew of or even knew Dr. Tatum when she was president of Spelman College. And someone out there is going to, excuse me, someone out there will be lucky enough to have a signed copy of Dr. Tatum's best-selling book, Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria, and Other Conversations About Race. She realized record-breaking alumnus support, major renovations, and more financial aid for international students at Spelman, and she oversaw the creation of Spelman's Center for Leadership and Civic Engagement, LEADS, which established an annual Women of Color Leadership Conference. She's a recipient of the Carnegie Academic Leadership Award and a recipient of the prestigious Brock International Prize in Education. She has a long list, a very long list, so please read her resume, her bio rather, in the journal. And right now, will you please welcome Dr. Beverly Daniel Tatum.
Thank you all. Thank you very much, and good evening. It is truly an honor to be here with all of you. I want to thank Elaine Gross for the invitation, and I have to say I didn't know Dr. Lewis or David Gallo before I arrived, but I'm truly honored to be in your company, having heard about your bold visions for change and the impact you're making in this community. So thank you for including me. Thank you. I'm certainly honored to be the recipient of the Abraham Krasnoff Award and to be recognized by this important organization. You heard a lot of things about me in this introduction, but one of the things you didn't hear is that I too was born in 1954. It's a good year for the 1954 babies. I was born in September, just 4 months after, a little younger. I was born in September, just 4 months after the Brown versus Board of Education Supreme Court decision. And as you know, we are marking the 65th anniversary of that decision. I was born in Tallahassee, Florida. And at the time that I was born, my father was teaching in the art department at Florida A&M University in Tallahassee, which, as you may know, is a historically black university. Yes. Both he and my mother were 1949 graduates of Howard University, another historically black university. A few Bisons in the house. And my father went on to earn a Master's of Art degree, a fine arts degree at the University of Iowa in 1951. So why am I telling you this? Fast forward to 1954. As I mentioned, he was an art professor at Florida A&M, and he wanted to earn his doctorate in art education at nearby Florida State University, which is also in Tallahassee. But in 1954, even after the Brown decision, FSU was for whites only. And even though at that time state-sanctioned segregation had been outlawed by that Supreme Court decision, the state of Florida, like a lot of southern states, was slow to comply. And the law required the state to provide access to graduate education, but the way they did it was to pay my father's transportation out of the state. They paid his train fare to Pennsylvania. And in 1957, he earned his degree at Penn State University. Now, that seems ridiculous today, but in 1958, my parents decided after he'd finished his degree, they'd had enough of Florida's segregated educational system, and they moved their family to Massachusetts, which is where I grew up. My dad became the first African-American professor at Bridgewater State College, now known as Bridgewater State University in Bridgewater, Massachusetts, which was my hometown. Now, I wanted to begin my remarks this evening by telling you that story about my father in the state of Florida, not only because of the 65th anniversary of Brown versus Board of Education, but because it's evidence of the possibility of positive social change. Today, that story seems ridiculous, and Florida State University is quite a diverse institution. And when I tell young people about my father's experience, they are amazed. Hard to believe that that was in my lifetime, but it was. But today, we live in a time when we must continually remind ourselves that change is possible. I think it's important to remind all of you that change is possible because we live in a time when many people feel discouraged. Though segregation is no longer legally required, Dr. Lewis told us what the state of affairs is right here on Long Island. And K through 12 schools across the nation are more segregated today than they were in the 1990s. And that's not the only example of what appears to be backward motion in our society. In 1968, Reverend Dr. King wrote about such a time as this. In his last book, which is entitled, Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos or Community, he said, the line of progress is never straight. The inevitable counter-revolution that succeeds every period of progress is taking place. He said that in 1968, but it's certainly true in 2019. Many people feel like that we are in another period of pushback against our most recent period of progress. So what does this mean for all of us in 2019? It means that if we want to move forward again, all of us gathered here and beyond, will have to be part of the change. We will all have to claim our place as leaders. There's a theme running through these remarks this evening in that everyone so far has said we all have to be part of this, and I want to underscore that as well. We all have the capacity for leadership whether we know it or not. We all influence others through our example. You never know who is watching you, paying attention to the example you provide. But I can guarantee that you all have a sphere of influence, whether that's family, friends, coworkers, members of your congregation, your social organizations. We each have to ask, how can I use my sphere of influence to advocate for the change I want to see? And the more we do that, the larger our sphere of influence will grow. So let's be bold in our vision for change. Erase Racism is a bold name for an organization. And that is what we need right now, to be bold in our vision for change. I heard some boldness coming from David Gallo when he talked about his vision for affordable housing. I heard some boldness coming from Dr. Lewis when she talked about what needs to happen with schools right here in Long Island. The fact of the matter is we can't just tweak structural racism. We must erase it. I have a small paperweight. Thank you. I have a small paperweight that a student gave me a long time ago. I keep it on the desk in my office, and it says, what would you do if you knew you could not fail? I think that's a powerful question, one we should all ask ourselves. What would you do if you knew you could not fail? Each of you will have your own answer to that question, but one thing I know for sure is that we can't let fear hold us back. I have a pastor friend who says fear stands for false evidence appearing real. Let me repeat that, F-E-A-R, false evidence appearing real. Well, if you have any fear, if you think about change and you're fearful about that, replace that fear with hope. And what does hope stand for? Well, I say it stands for having optimism produces effort. H-O-P-E. Having optimism produces effort. And effective effort, my friends, produces results. Yes, we live in challenging times, and yet, even in a storm, there is opportunity for those with vision and determination. This is a time for creativity and bold thinking. innovation, and imagination. This is the time for bold vision, for as a wise prophet once said, without vision, the people will perish. So let us all be bold in our vision for social change. It is time for all of us to cast out fear and replace it with hope. And as I look out at all of you, I see the embodiment of hope. You have gathered here as members of a diverse community because you want to see change. All of you already have the tools you need to be agents of change in your communities, and that is a very hopeful thought. But as I'm sure you know from your own efforts, being an agent of change is not easy. When you try, there are people who will discourage you, who will spit at you, who will say you're just being politically correct, or some things will never change. In a polarized world, some people will just stop speaking to you. I would like to suggest that we all need to maintain a discipline of hope. And I use the word discipline intentionally. Like regular exercise is a discipline, so is the maintenance of hope. The more you do it, the easier it gets. But like establishing a regular pattern of exercise, it requires a certain amount of willpower. So in closing, I would like to leave you with my own list of best strategies for maintaining this discipline of hope. The list is short, 3 items. The first, avoid burnout. It's hard to be hopeful when you're exhausted. Maintain the appropriate, I'm sure Elaine could tell me something about that. Maintain the appropriate balance between withdrawals and deposits. Social change work is hard. It has its rewards, but it also has its costs. And when you make withdrawals of emotional, spiritual, or physical energy, it has to be balanced by deposits. So, each of us has our own way of making deposits, but however you do it, remember this: if you make a lot of withdrawals, you better make a lot of deposits. 2, create a support group. Recently, I spoke to some college graduates, and I advised them to find others who have similar values and commitments to share their struggles with. I told them, wherever you are, you can find 1 or 2 people, and that is all you really need. But you all are lucky, because you need look no further than those who are here in this room to find that community of support. The third item on my list: spend time with those who are more hopeful than you. I am a person of faith. I'm a person of faith, and I read a lot of books about spirituality, and once I read one that recommended if you wanted to grow in your faith, you should spend time with people who had more faith than you did. And I found that to be very useful advice. Hope and faith are close cousins, so if you want more hope, spend time with people who have some. A hopeful man I deeply admire is Bryan Stevenson, founder of the Equal Justice Initiative and author of the best-selling book, Just Mercy. I heard him say in a radio interview, "Hopelessness is the enemy of justice. Injustice prevails when hopelessness persists." I'm going to repeat that. Injustice prevails when hopelessness persists. So it is incumbent upon all of us to stay hopeful. Change is possible. We must be bold and practice the discipline of hope. Our bold vision, harnessed with the energy that comes from hope, will lead us to the change we all desperately need. Thank you very much for your presence here tonight. Thank you.